Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of my Busch Gardens Williamsburg recreation. Last time we wrapped up the France and New France areas of the park, finished all the buildings and pathing structures over there. And today we're finally making our way further into Germany, past Alpengeist, and we have built a significant amount of the buildings that are going to be going over in this area. So I figured this is a good time to stop and show off what I've got. I guess it's not a ton of like super major builds, but like I always say, there is a lot of time and planning that goes into figuring out where these paths are going to go, how these buildings are going to be shaped, how to change the structures in a way that makes sense with RCT. So at least for this area, it turned out pretty okay, I think. It's a little bit tricky how to figure out how to place all these things, but we have this big building structure over here that's mostly, I believe, restrooms and food, maybe a shop or two, which does make kind of a circular path area over here. Hopefully it's going to be good for pathfinding and peeps aren't going to be getting lost over here. Again, trying to keep as few dead ends in the park as we can. And like I mentioned before, over with the England part of the build, we're using some more of those European expansion pieces to make these buildings because they just look so much like the real thing. The shapes and colors don't always quite work exactly. For example, the pitch of these roofs is like really steep. Doesn't match a lot of the other standard roofs that you get in the base game. So it's kind of an all or nothing approach. If you start using these Tudor roof pieces, you got to use them for the whole building. Otherwise, the shapes don't work out. We got a lot of that going on over here. Hopefully it's not so egregious that it sticks out and looks a bit funky. I'm thinking that since we're putting them next to some other different kinds of roof textures that it's not going to be overwhelming. Things will have enough visual interest on kind of a macro scale that it'll work out. At least the footprints of these buildings are mostly interesting. I mean, this one obviously isn't. It's just a big rectangle, but that's the way the building is. But this one has a pretty interesting footprint, so that gives it some visual interest, and I'm really happy with the way that one turned out. Anyway, also in this area we have a couple rides. You see our carousel over here. Nothing too crazy going on with this one. Pretty standard build with some steeplechase fence and some wooden track for a roof. Not too different from the roofs I built over in the Italy section. Just tweaked a little bit. It's not quite the same as the Apollo's Chariot tent over here, but the concept and ideas are very similar. So it gives it a nice little shallow peaked look that I think works out okay. Big news, next door we have the Skyride. It is open, it is fully functional. And I managed to get the Skyride to have a track layout that actually works pretty well. Doesn't have a lot of weird jaggies for the most part. Things are a straight shot between each station, which is a freaking miracle that it kind of worked out the way that it did. As I showed off before, from here back to the station over in the England area, it's a straight shot. So that was really nice that worked out the way that it did. And then over to the Germany area, it is a straight shot diagonally. Somehow I managed to get that to work out. I don't really know how it worked out as well as it did. We are hiding some weird curves over here inside the Germany station to get it to line up a little bit better. For the most part, you can't really tell, and it just looks like the Skyride, you know, goes in one wall and comes out another wall, so kind of does what it needs to do. I guess it's not too unrealistic anyway. You do have that in real Skyride stations, where the cables can move around where they need to around, you know, the big pulleys that drive them in the first place. I'm obviously not an expert at all in the way these things work, but yeah, I will say that I'm pretty happy that the layout was able to work out as well as it did. As I mentioned, we're using a single rail coaster track for the Skyride itself, with the bottom half invisible, so you just see the top of the single rail track painted black, so it looks like a cable, and I think it worked out really well. And then I have some original chairlift supports here to act as stand-ins for like where the big poles would be. Obviously it looks a little bit silly because they still have the two rails on them where the vanilla cables are supposed to go, but even with that I think it still looks pretty good. I quite like the way these turned out. They're a little bit silly on the diagonal track because they're kind of facing the slightly wrong direction, but honestly I don't really mind it. So yeah, pretty happy with the way Skyride turned out. Straight lines for all three legs that was the goal, and it worked out. And we even have it going through the Immelman here for Griffin, which is pretty awesome. So I guess a little bit of planning there all worked out in the end. So very happy with that. Also over here we have this zone. This is kind of the kiddie area of the park. if you discount the Sesame Street and San Marco areas. I guess it's the other kiddie area. I believe it's called Land of the Dragons, something like that. Despite there being really no dragon theming over here, at least there isn't in my build. I didn't really go over here when I last visited the park, so I can neither confirm nor deny what kind of dragons are over here. We just have a couple little spinny flat rides, same kind of flat rides that I always build in these kinds of areas. Very typical designs, but somehow the peeps love them anyway, even though the stats on these are going to be miserable. 3, 3.5, 3. It's actually that's not too bad now that I think about it. Oh, it's probably because, yeah, I have these set to be motion simulators to make the track invisible. So all 3 of these are motion simulators, so they get motion simulator stats. So I guess that's enough for peeps to go crazy for them. There's also this playground structure here in the middle. Not an official ride, but lots of path to get lost in, and a little bit of decoration and track for peeps to walk around on. So far it's pretty popular over here, which hopefully doesn't mean that people are getting lost. At least if they are getting lost, I think it's because they're trying to navigate over here to the Scotland area, and they can't because there's no path connecting them. So there will be soon. I need to finish building this path over here. This will eventually connect over to here. So that will definitely help with peep pathfinding in the near future. But right now it's going to be a little bit crowded over here as everyone gets lost. The last thing I have to show off for today is we actually do have a new roller coaster built and open for business, and that is Dark Coaster. It's hiding underneath this big plot of land. Hasn't changed very much from our original drafts. I think I mentioned before, this one's a little bit tough to get perfect in RCT because some of the launches are on a diagonal. Everything's very compact. It's hard to do super compact coasters like this, especially dealing with the grid and everything. We are going to get rid of this lane, and I'm going to replace this with scenery instead for an actual building. That way we can do a cutout, do some more decorations, things like that. Throughput on this is terrible, but from what I hear, that matches the real life ride pretty well, so I guess that's a little bonus. Even though we don't have this thing going 2 laps, the real life coaster has some switch track in it so that each ride you will go through the entire layout twice, and I guess that is probably a big part of the reason why the throughput on this is so bad. But for my build, I didn't want to do that because I don't think there's a good way to do a 2-lap coaster with multiple trains and without using like a plug-in or something. So another little break from reality, but that's one that I can definitely live with. Not upset about that at all. So still a lot of decoration to do on that one, obviously. We still just have our placeholder in here for these buildings. But we're making some significant headway into Germany, and just a couple of rides left in here. Some major path decorating to do, a couple more buildings, all that good stuff. And then we'll be connecting back up to Italy here probably pretty soon. Once I figure out the layout for Verbolten and how all that stuff is gonna match up. But yeah, that's about it for this episode. Like I said, making some progress. Really happy with the way the little play area turned out. Really happy with the way the sky ride turned out. Still some more work to do, tweaking things as always, but I'll be saving that for some future builds. In the meantime, hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks for watching.